Well, you can't be one for rules. Do you understand? Now listen up and pay attention, 'cause we fitting to put some things in motion. Well, I got the cards in my hand.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simmons.
Flip hop shop into a gambling den. Start up a numbers game.
What you're hearing is from a new opera commissioned by The Lyric here in Chicago. It's called the Factotum. It'll be debuting at the Harris Theater tomorrow, February 3rd. The opera is an adaptation of the classic The Barber of Seville. But in this version, it is receiving quite the remix. Here now to tell us all about this hip opera is the director, dramaturg, and co-book writer, Rajendra Ramoon Maharaj. Great to have you on Reset.
Nice to have you.
So first, I got to ask, is hip opera, is that a fair characterization? Do you hate the term or do you embrace it?
Listen, I embrace hip hop because hip hop is the elements of all the things that come from the Black experience and contribution to music. It's gospel, it's blues, it's rhythm, it's bebop. And so it's a great moment in opera, which for a very long time has historically bypassed people of color and hip hop as one of the most influential art forms America's ever created. So I'm very proud that we have this moment.
You've been involved in many, many productions, but this is your first time directing an opera, right?
I know. I'm so excited.
What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? Well, to be perfectly honest, there were many times in my journey as a storyteller where it seemed like a very high wall, a very high white wall that I was not going to be able
One
to
that you
scale,
couldn't cross.
That I could not cross. And I always think about that great quote from Harriet Tubman where she says, I can look over the river and I can see all these beautiful white images of people dancing and singing, but I can't cross that river. I've been trying to cross that river. And this is the moment, I think, for many of us of color that we're crossing this river.
You're crossing the river. I mentioned in the intro that this is an adaptation of The Barber of Seville. Remind us of that story.
Yeah, and so it's the story of basically, a barber, and there's a soldier, and there's a young ingenue, and all of the things that could happen in a love story around a barber shop. But what makes ours unique is that it is set in the south side of Chicago. And it is set in a time and a space in the summer of 2012, which a lot of things were happening in the movement. And so it really resonates. And I noticed before you were talking about August Wilson, and this opera, in a way like August, really takes the average man and woman and makes them the kings and queens and the teachers and the leaders in the culture of the barbershop, which is the center, like the Black church.
I love that.
Of our community.
Is that why you wanted to do this adaptation?
Yes. And Chicago, I mean, my God, the history of barbershops and how it connected to every movement in this country. It's really exciting. And to see all the characters that come into the barbershop throughout the day that make up the fabric of our community.
Talk more about how you connected with Will and your other collaborators. I know DJ King Rico as well.
Yes. Well, Will and I were doing Fire Shut Up in My Bones at the Met, which was another historic moment. The first time the Met had ever produced a living African-American composer, Terrence Blanchard, and he was the star of it, and I was the assistant director. And we just befriended, and on breaks, Will would be in the corner huddled working, and I'm like, you're going through this emotional show, and yet you're still working on something. He's like, I'm working on this thing called the Factotum. And through the theater gods, here we are today.
So talk about that, the Factotum. I want to hear about that name because it loosely translates to master of everything or jack of all trades. What are you implying with the title?
Well, because inherently Black people of color have given the world civilization. We've always had to wear many hats. In this production, I'm the stage director, the dramaturg, and so we all kind of hustle. And so we wanted to kind of honor in the barbershop culture that in Black barbershop culture, and particularly here in Chicago, people wear many hats to get their stuff done.
Did you always want to find a way to bring hip hop and R&B influences to opera?
Absolutely. As a child of the 90s and just coming up through that, which I consider to be one of the greatest times of music.
Isn't it though?
It is, girl. And so I wanted to make sure that we could find a way. And Will and King, they love all forms of music, but particularly, the Boys to Men, and TLC. And so they brought a lot of that vibe to it with opera.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting.
I want you to help make the connection for people who still don't get it, because at first glance, so, you see hip hop and opera, you might not think that that's an immediately obvious connection. What connections do you see between the two genres?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about storytelling, right? And coming from an experience. So if you look at hip hop and you look at the civil rights songs and the blues and from even going back to slavery, the freedom songs, they're all telling the story of who we are. They're all rooted in the church. We're all rooted in the church and the experience of the mixture of our experience and our history and our rhythms. And that's what this is bringing. And it's the first of its kind.
Yeah. How else are you updating the story for these new audiences that you'll draw in this time around?
Well, one of the things that we're really cool about and excited about is that we don't often get to explore in opera multi-dimensional Black characters of our humanity. So we have queer characters. We have we have immigrant characters from Africa. We have a love story between a Mexican American female and a Black man and how that plays out. We talk about the military. We talk about the movement and Black Lives Matter, and just the continuing struggle to create community in the world. And
take me into the conversations behind the scenes when you were deciding to weave all those things in.
Well, as a dramaturg, it was very long. And we always kind of rooted in the music because it is an opera, but it was one that we really wanted to make sure that not only that could entertain, but that Black people could see themselves reflected as fully realized human beings. And we had our dress yesterday, and it was incredible to see over 1,000, BIPOC kids experiencing their first opera and seeing themselves and the people in their community reflected as heroes and sheroes. And it was overwhelming.
Oh my gosh, what did that look like?
It was so moving. It was one of the most moving moments I've had in my career because I was that kid that leaned forward, that had to sit in the cheap seats of life often. And so to be able to say that, no, you this is a path forward. This is a North Star, and your stories matter. And the people in your community matter. And it just really stirred us.
Yeah. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, we're talking with Rajendra Ramoon Maharaj. He is the director and director for the new opera, the Factotum. It'll debut tomorrow at the Harris Theater. I want to hear more about what drew you to opera.
Yeah.
Personally.
Personally, what drew me is that, being perfectly honest, a lot of people told me that Black directors don't work in opera. And I've always been a person that wall. And why can't I occupy that space? If I can tell these different stories and coming from the Black church, we are opera. It is very theatrical on Easter Sunday.
Absolutely.
And coming from a Caribbean background, we have Jonkanu, we have Carnival, and, there's a theatricality to us as a people. So I always felt like I could occupy the space. And Fire opened the door. And once the door was opened, the talent always shines.
Here's something else you said on this. This was in an interview with The Lyric. You said, quote, "The truth is Black people have ignored opera for far too long because opera has ignored us."
Yes.
Yeah. You think the Factotum is representing maybe a shift in the opera world?
Absolutely. I mean, I think because of the way the city of Chicago has embraced it, particularly people of color, many will have their first experience like those kids did of opera. I think it's what, that quote, I lifted from one of my heroes, Lorraine Hansberry, because she talked about Raisin in the Sun. They had ignored Broadway until they saw Raisin. And we know what Raisin has meant for the world and for Chicago. And so I think Factotum hopefully will continue that legacy in the world of opera. Yeah,
and this shift that we're talking about, this is happening, as you talked about, among the performers, but the audiences too. Right? This is opening up witnesses to just an entirely new thing, right?
Yeah.
People who have been used to seeing opera for decades haven't quite seen it like this.
And also just Black and brown bodies in the South Side of Chicago, folks who work in the barbershops, folks who find the barbershop zone, are coming to see themselves reflected. And for the first time, many who have been here for years and years have never walked into Chicago Lyric are now coming.
The barbershop is such an important place for Black people. Such an important place for our communities. So many things are shared there. Just a magical place.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
I love that it's coming to stage.
Barber/beauty shop. So you've got both the vibes,
All the secrets.
Yeah.
I think for some people too, just thinking of the opera over time, and by some people, I'm even talking about myself, it's felt pretty intimidating. at times. There's a lot of lingo, a lot of new lingo, right? Oftentimes it's in a different language too. What is your pitch, Rajendra, for people of all backgrounds? Why should they give opera a shot?
That's a fantastic question, and I appreciate it. And I will say that I think that because it reflects the grandness of what we love from Hollywood and the beauty and the intimacy that we love from the theater, and it's some of the most beautiful, powerful singers in the world come from opera. And particularly with Factotum, the Factotum, there is literally something in the show. If you've never seen an opera, if you are like the most jaded person, that you're like, oh my God, that's my uncle. Oh my God, that's my auntie. Oh, I had that experience. And so there is a wide kind of entry point for folks to come into the world and see themselves reflected.
You struck me earlier when you talked about how you're wearing all the different hats. You're doing this role and that role and that role. What's on your theater bucket list?
Well, I would like to eventually start to look at the canon from August. I met Mr. Wilson when I was younger, and he became a mentor and encouraged me to write. But I've always felt that his work, you need to have a certain life experience to bring to it.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like I'm at that point now where I'm able to do that. And I'd like to continue to see the next generation of BIPOC directors look at opera, look at Broadway, and, not lose them to film and television.
What do you hope folks take away from the Factotum?
That our community is strong, that we inherently, with all the things that are happening in the world today, some terrible things that are happening in the world today, the barbershop really creates a hamlet where people can be seen and know that their stories matter and that their lives matter.
That was Rahjendra Ramoon Maharaj, who's director of the Factotum, a new opera from the Lyric, and it's debuting tomorrow, February 3rd at the Harris Theater. Good luck. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.